For 12 years, the galaxy had burned. World after world vanished beneath the shadow of the Karthic Dominion. Great civilizations that once ruled star systems were now nothing more than drifting debris fields and silent graveyards orbiting dead suns. The Dominion did not conquer, consumed. Now, only one defense remained between the monsters and the heart of the Galactic Empire. Orion Gate, a fortress station larger than a moon, floated beside the collapsing blue giant star, its massive defense cannons glowing red-hot from weeks of non-stop firing. Thousands of wrecked warships drifted through the surrounding void like broken bones in a cosmic ocean. Inside the command chamber, Grand Admiral Serafel Vorn stood silently before the massive holographic battlefield. The display was hopeless. Enemy numbers continued increasing every hour. 9 Dominion fleets, 32 dreadnoughts, bioharvest carriers, boarding swarms, and behind them all, the black mass. The Karthic hive cloud stretched across space like a living storm, swallowing stars behind its endless tide of ships. An Imperial officer swallowed nervously. Admiral, long-range scans confirm the 4th defensive line has collapsed. Nobody reacted. There was no emotion left to give. The chamber itself looked like a tomb. Exhausted officers stood beneath flickering lights while distant explosions trembled through the station hull. Smoke leaked from overloaded consoles. Medical evacuation alarms echoed somewhere deep below the command decks. They all knew what came next. Orion Gate would fall, and after that, the Empire would die. Admiral Vorn slowly closed his eyes. 12 years, he whispered, and this is how it ends. Suddenly, warning sirens shrieked across the chamber. Officers jumped in alarm. A communications technician looked up in confusion. Unknown hyperspace rupture detected. Vorn frowned. Another Dominion fleet already? But then the technician's expression changed from fear to disbelief. That's impossible. The holographic battlefield distorted violently. Then everyone in the chamber froze. Across the dark void beyond Orion Gate, space itself began tearing open. Not one rupture. Hundreds. Brilliant blue fractures split the stars apart like cracks in glass. Massive shockwaves rippled through nearby debris fields as something enormous pushed through hyperspace. Imperial officers stared speechlessly. No known species could open jump corridors this close to a gravity well. Ships attempting it were usually ripped apart atom by atom. Yet these vessels emerged untouched. Slowly, deliberately, like predators entering a hunting ground. The first ship appeared. Then another. Then dozens more. The newcomers looked nothing like Imperial warships. No elegant curves. No glowing ceremonial structures. These ships were brutal slabs of dark metal covered in visible weapon batteries, heavy armor plating, and engine scars. Some still carried burn marks from previous battles. They looked old, primitive even. But the moment they fully emerged into real space, every Imperial scanner in the station overloaded simultaneously. Warning alerts flooded the chamber. Unknown energy signatures. Weapon output unregistered. Shield structure unknown. An officer's voice trembled. Admiral, their energy readings. Another officer interrupted in horror. That can't be correct. Vorn stared at the numbers himself. His blood ran cold. One of those vessels alone carried enough firepower to cripple an Imperial battle group. And there were hundreds of them. Silence filled the command deck. Then a transmission signal appeared. Unknown origin. Unknown language. The station AI struggled for several seconds before finally translating the message. The deep voice that echoed across the chamber was calm, almost casual. This is Fleet Admiral Elias Ward of the United Earth Naval Command. The officers exchanged confused glances. Earth? Human? No records existed of such a species. The voice continued. We received your distress signal. Another pause. Then, you people look like you could use some help. Several officers actually laughed. Not from humor, from disbelief. The exhausted sound of beings who had stared at death for too long. One Imperial commander shook his head. Help? That fleet is tiny compared to the Dominion. As if answering him, the void outside suddenly erupted. Dominion attack vessels accelerated toward the unknown fleet like swarming insects. Thousands of black ships surged across the battlefield, their organic hulls twisting beneath crimson energy veins. They were attacking immediately. Vorn's eyes widened. They don't even know what they're facing. The human fleet did not retreat, did not scatter, did not panic. Instead, every human ship suddenly went dark. No engine glow, No weapon lights. Nothing. For one terrifying moment, they vanished into the blackness of space itself. Then the stars exploded. Blinding streaks of white light tore across the battlefield. Missiles. Thousands of them. The swarm moved like a silver tidal wave, weaving between asteroids and wreckage with impossible precision before crashing directly into the Dominion frontline. The void became fire. Entire enemy cruisers vanished in chain explosions. Shockwaves ripped through nearby vessels. One Dominion dreadnought split completely in half. Inside Orion Gate, alarms screamed as officers struggled to comprehend what they were witnessing. How are those projectiles bypassing shields? That's impossible. Then the human ships moved. Not gracefully, violently. Their engines ignited with thunderous blue flames as the fleet accelerated straight into the enemy formation. Directly into it, like wolves charging a larger beast. Massive railgun fire flashed through darkness. Dominion vessels shattered. One human destroyer lost half its hull, yet continued fighting while spinning through debris fields, guns still firing. Another accelerated directly toward a Dominion carrier. Vorn's eyes widened. They're going to collide. The human ship rammed straight through the carrier's center. A sunbright explosion consumed both vessels. Silence filled the chamber. Even the Dominion advance had stopped, as though the enemy itself was stunned. Then, a final transmission arrived from the human flagship. Admiral Ward's voice remained perfectly calm. Orion Gate Command, he said. Permission to enter the battlefield? Grand Admiral Vorn stared at the burning stars outside, at the impossible fleet tearing through the Dominion like wrath unleashed from the void itself. And for the first time in 12 years, the Empire felt hope. But deep within the black swarm beyond the battlefield, something ancient had awakened, and it recognized humanity. The battlefield burned for 17 straight hours. By the time the fighting finally slowed, the void around Orion Gate had transformed into a floating graveyard of shattered Dominion vessels. Broken alien carcasses drifted beside burning wreckage, while damaged Imperial ships limped back toward the fortress station trailing smoke and sparks. But the strangest sight of all was the human fleet. They remained perfectly still in the darkness beyond the battlefield, silent, watching, like iron predators waiting for the next attack. Inside Orion Gate's command chamber, nobody spoke above a whisper anymore. Fear had changed shape. Now, they feared the humans. Grand Admiral Seraphel Vorn stood before tactical displays replaying combat footage from the battle. Again and again, the same impossible moments repeated across the holograms. Human ships continuing to fight after catastrophic damage. Human missiles altering direction mid-flight. Human vessels sacrificing themselves without hesitation. One recording froze on a terrifying image. A heavily damaged human cruiser drifting through flames while its crew continued firing manually after most of the ship had depressurized. Imperial officers stared at the footage in silence. Finally, Commander Lyris spoke quietly. They never retreated. Another officer swallowed nervously. They rammed their own ships into enemy carriers. Vorn's expression darkened. No, he muttered. They turned their ships into weapons. The chamber fell silent again, because everyone understood what that meant. The humans had entered the battle already prepared to die. Suddenly, warning alert. New Dominion signatures detected. Several officers panicked instantly. So soon, the tactical screen zoomed outward toward the outer debris fields. A surviving Dominion strike swarm emerged from the wreckage cloud, hundreds of smaller attack craft moving rapidly toward Orion Gate. Fast. Too fast for Imperial defenses to recharge. Commander Lyris cursed. Our cannons are still overheated. Interceptor wings are depleted. Vorn immediately turned toward communications. Signal the human fleet. But before the order finished, the humans moved first. Out in the darkness, small lights suddenly appeared beneath the hulls of the silent human ships. Tiny red lights, thousands of them. Imperial sensors struggled to identify the objects as they detached from the fleet. Then someone whispered in confusion. Those aren't fighters. The objects accelerated, fast enough to trigger shockwaves across local space. Drone signatures flooded the tactical displays. But these weren't ordinary drones. They moved like a swarm of angry insects, twisting violently through debris fields at impossible angles. Some collided deliberately with Dominion craft, detonating in bursts of white plasma. Others sliced directly through enemy hulls using focused energy beams. Within minutes, The entire Dominion strike force vanished. Destroyed. The command chamber stood frozen. No cheering. No celebration. Only stunned silence. Commander Lyris stared blankly at the tactical screen. They fought an entire engagement, without pilots. Another officer looked pale. How many weapons are they hiding? Before anyone answered, a new transmission appeared. Human origin. Admiral Vorn accepted it cautiously. The hologram flickered. For the first time, the Empire saw a human. Fleet Admiral Elias Ward looked older than expected. Gray streaks cut through his dark hair, and deep scars lined one side of his face. Unlike Imperial commanders covered in ceremonial armor, the human wore a simple black military coat. But his eyes, cold, tired, the eyes of someone who had witnessed too many wars. Behind him, human officers moved calmly across a dim command bridge filled with red tactical displays and warning lights. Ward spoke plainly. "You've got wounded ships drifting outside your defense perimeter." Vorn blinked. "Yes? We're sending recovery teams." Several Imperial officers exchanged alarmed looks. "You can't," Commander Lyris interrupted. "Dominion boarding organisms are still alive in those wrecks." Ward didn't react. "We know." Then the transmission ended. The chamber erupted instantly. "They're insane. They'll lose entire crews. They don't understand what those creatures do." Suddenly, another officer interrupted in horror. "Wait!" Everyone turned toward the external displays. Small human boarding craft were already moving through the debris field toward crippled Imperial ships, toward drifting wrecks infested with Dominion organisms, toward death. One of the camera feeds zoomed closer. Imperial officers watched as human soldiers breached a ruined cruiser spinning silently through space. The interior feed activated briefly. Dark corridors, emergency lights flashing red, dead bodies floating weightlessly. Then movement. A Dominion creature unfolded from the shadows. 6 limbs, bone-like armor, rows of teeth opening sideways. The Imperial officer monitoring the footage flinched. "No human survives that." The creature charged. Gunfire erupted. The camera shook violently. For several seconds, only screams and static filled the feed. Then, silence. The image stabilized. The Dominion organism lay dead on the floor, and standing over it was a human soldier breathing heavily behind a cracked helmet visor. Blood floated through the air around him, but the soldier calmly reloaded his weapon and continued deeper into the wreck. Inside Orion Gate, nobody spoke, not even Vorn, because the human had not looked frightened. If anything, he looked angry. Hours later, the rescued Imperial survivors finally returned aboard human transports. The stories spread quickly across the station. The humans had entered infested wrecks without hesitation, fought in darkness, carried wounded strangers to safety. One survivor repeated the same sentence over and over with visible disbelief. "They came back for us." Meanwhile, deep inside the human flagship Resolute, Admiral Ward stood alone before a holographic star map. A younger officer approached carefully. "Sir, Dominion forces are regrouping." Ward nodded slowly. "I know." The officer hesitated. "There's something else." He activated another display. Ancient Dominion symbols appeared across the screen. Old war markings, forgotten classifications. Then one phrase translated itself automatically. Ward's expression hardened instantly. The officer looked uneasy. "Sir, the Dominion identified us." Silence filled the dark command room. Finally, Ward whispered quietly, "So they remember." Far beyond Orion Gate, inside the endless black hive cloud, millions of alien eyes opened simultaneously. And for the first time in centuries, the Karthic Dominion felt fear. 3 days after humanity's arrival, the war changed. Not because the Dominion stopped attacking, but because the Empire finally realized what had entered the battlefield. And it terrified them. The medical decks beneath Orion Gate were overflowing with wounded soldiers when the screaming started. Imperial doctors rushed toward the containment ward where rescued survivors from the outer wreck fields were undergoing examination. But the panic wasn't coming from patients. It was coming from the guards. Commander Lyris stormed through the corridor just as emergency blast doors slammed shut ahead of her. "What happened?" A shaken officer pointed toward the reinforced observation glass. "The human." Lyris turned and froze. Inside the containment chamber, a fully grown Dominion boarding organism lay twitching on the floor in pieces, black blood smeared across the walls. Standing beside it was a human medic. Not a soldier. A medic. The woman's white medical uniform was covered in blood as she calmly treated an injured Imperial survivor while the dead creature burned behind her. Lyris stared in disbelief. That thing breached containment alone? The guard nodded shakily. It killed 3 armed security officers before she arrived. Inside the chamber, the human medic glanced toward the observation window. For one brief second, she smiled. Not proudly, not arrogantly, just tired. As though killing monsters during medical duty was somehow normal. Lyris suddenly understood why Imperial soldiers whispered about humans like ghost stories. They weren't fearless. That would have made sense. No, humans were simply accustomed to surviving nightmares. Elsewhere in Orion Gate, hidden deep within the intelligence archives, Imperial analysts uncovered classified information stolen from human data cores during battlefield synchronization. The files should not have existed. Entire rooms of intelligence officers sat in horrified silence as ancient Earth history played across holographic screens. Human wars, human famines, human extinctions, nuclear fire consuming cities, machine uprisings, economic collapses, global plagues, and somehow, humanity survived every single one. An elderly analyst removed his glasses slowly. These records can't be real. Another officer looked pale while studying Earth's environmental classification. Death World category. Murmurs spread across the chamber. Most intelligent species evolved on relatively stable worlds. Earth was not stable. Earth was chaos. Violent weather, predators, diseases, natural disasters, constant conflict. One analyst whispered quietly, "They evolved there?" Another responded, "And they conquered it." Suddenly, a new classified file unlocked itself automatically. Title: First Contact Incident. Archived Threat Record. The room fell silent. A video began playing. The footage was old and distorted. A distant human colony burned beneath orbital bombardment while terrified civilians ran through fire and collapsing buildings. Then came the symbol. The same black spiral now carried by the Karthic Dominion. One officer's voice trembled. The Dominion attacked them before. The final section of the recording showed something worse. Not the destruction. The response. Human survivors standing among the ashes, watching silently, remembering. One final line appeared across the screen. Humanity does not forget. The room went cold. Meanwhile, outside Orion Gate, Dominion fleets gathered once more. Thousands of organic warships drifted through the darkness beyond sensor range like predators circling wounded prey. But this time, they stayed back, waiting, observing. Inside the massive Hive command vessel, the Dominion overmind pulsed violently within its biomechanical throne. Millions of connected consciousnesses whispered through the Hive network. One repeated message echoed endlessly. The Deathworld species has returned. Ancient fear spread through the Hive memory. Not because humans were strongest, but because they were unpredictable. Centuries ago, humanity had done something no species had ever attempted. When the Dominion destroyed one of their outer colonies, humans hunted them across 3 sectors for nearly 80 years. Not for resources, not territory, revenge. The Overmind still remembered burning Hive worlds. Human fleets emerging from radiation storms. Captured Dominion vessels turned into bombs. Entire battle groups sacrificing themselves just to ensure mutual destruction. Humans did not think like civilized species. They thought like survivors cornered too many times. And survivors were dangerous. Back aboard the human flagship Resolute, Admiral Elias Ward studied the battlefield in silence. Behind him, alarms blinked softly across darkened tactical displays. A younger officer approached cautiously. "Sir, Imperial Command wants to know why the Dominion halted their assault." Ward didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared at the drifting wreckage outside the viewport. Thousands dead already, and worse still coming. Finally, he spoke quietly. "They're adapting." The officer frowned. "To our weapons?" Ward shook his head slowly. "To us." Before the officer could reply, warning alerts erupted across the bridge. Dominion fleet movement detected. Massive movement. Entire sectors of enemy ships suddenly began accelerating at once. But not toward Orion Gate. Toward the outer system colonies. Civilian worlds. The young officer's face drained of color. "They're bypassing the fortress." Another transmission arrived simultaneously from Imperial Command. Panic filled the audio channel. Admiral Ward, Dominion fleets are targeting evacuation worlds. We cannot intercept in time. For several seconds, the bridge remained silent. Then Ward issued a single order. Deploy the Harbingers. Several human officers looked uneasy immediately. One whispered carefully, "Sir, are you sure?" Ward's tired eyes hardened. "No," he admitted. "But they started this war." Across the darkness beyond Orion Gate, new shapes emerged from the human fleet. Long, black, blade-like vessels unlike anything the Empire had seen before. No lights, no markings, no visible weapons, just shadows moving through space. Imperial scanners couldn't even lock onto them properly. Commander Lyris stared at the tactical display in confusion. "What are those ships?" Nobody answered, because even the humans aboard Orion Gate suddenly looked nervous. Then, the Shadow Fleet vanished. Not through hyperspace, not through jump gates. They simply disappeared. Moments later, distress signals began flooding the entire sector. Dominion worlds were under attack. And somewhere deep within enemy territory, humanity had just unleashed something the galaxy was never supposed to see. The first Dominion world died in silence. No warning, no fleet engagement, no massive invasion force. One moment, the hive world of Caraxus Prime pulsed with billions of connected minds beneath its organic megacities, and the next, it went dark. Every signal vanished simultaneously. Inside Orion Gate's command chamber, stunned Imperial officers stared at the tactical display as Dominion communications collapsed sector after sector. Commander Lyris whispered in disbelief. What did the humans do? Nobody knew, not even the Dominion. Far beyond the battlefield, inside the endless black hive cloud, panic spread through the overmind. Entire neural sectors were disappearing. Hive fleets sent to investigate never returned. Worse still, survivors described impossible things. Black ships emerging from empty space. Invisible attackers inside secured systems. Dominion crews dying before alarms even sounded. The reports made no sense. The humans weren't fighting like civilized species anymore. They were hunting. And for the first time in centuries, the Dominion began retreating. But fear made the hive dangerous. Very dangerous. At exactly 0300 station time, every alarm inside Orion Gate suddenly activated at once. Warning. Massive warp signature detected. Imperial officers snapped toward the main display. Then horror swept across the chamber. The stars themselves vanished. Something enormous was emerging from hyperspace directly in front of Orion Gate. A supermassive Dominion war moon. The biomechanical structure dwarfed entire fleets. Its surface covered in pulsating hive flesh and continent-sized weapon veins glowing crimson beneath layers of armor. Even Admiral Vorn felt his blood turn cold. My gods! Behind it came thousands more Dominion ships. An execution fleet. The final assault. Commander Lyris looked pale. They're going to ram the station. She was right. The war moon accelerated directly toward Orion Gate like a falling planet. Imperial cannons opened fire instantly. Blue energy beams slammed against the creature's armor hard enough to shake nearby moons. Nothing happened. The thing kept coming. Closer. Closer. The entire fortress station trembled as evacuation sirens echoed through every deck. Panic spread among civilians. Soldiers prepared for boarding. Some officers quietly began deleting classified files before the end came. Then, a calm human voice broke through the chaos. "This is Admiral Ward." The command chamber turned toward the transmission. Ward appeared standing aboard the Resolute, red warning lights flashing across his bridge. But unlike the Imperials, the humans weren't panicking. They looked focused, cold, as if this was simply another battlefield. Ward spoke quietly. "Imperial Command, withdraw your outer defense fleets." Vorn stared at him. "If we retreat, the station dies." Ward's expression never changed. "If you stay," he replied, "everyone dies." Silence filled the chamber. Then the old human leaned slightly forward. "Trust me." Minutes later, against every instinct screaming in his mind, Admiral Vorn gave the order. Imperial fleets pulled back from Orion Gate. The gigantic Dominion war moon advanced unopposed. Throughout the station, terrified crews watched the monster grow larger across observation windows. Some prayed, others cried. Many simply waited for death. Then the human fleet moved. Not toward the enemy. Away from it. Commander Lyris looked stunned. "They're retreating?" But Admiral Vorn noticed something strange. The humans weren't fleeing randomly. They were drawing precise lines through the battlefield, guiding the Dominion, leading them somewhere. Suddenly, a junior officer shouted, "The star!" Everyone turned. Orion's massive blue giant had become unstable. Solar flares erupted violently across its surface while strange gravitational distortions spread throughout the system. Vorn's eyes widened slowly. No! The humans had been planting devices inside the star for days. The realization hit like ice through his veins. They're weaponizing it. Outside, the black human ships accelerated dangerously close to the star's corona, weaving through storms of burning plasma. The Dominion fleet followed without hesitation. The war moon entered the gravitational zone. Then Admiral Ward gave a single order. Detonate the Helios array. For one terrifying second, nothing happened. Then the sun screamed. A blinding eruption exploded from Orion's surface. Gigantic waves of stellar fire erupted outward like the wrath of a god unleashed into space itself. The battlefield vanished beneath white light. Imperial officers shielded their eyes as sensors overloaded instantly. The shockwave hit moments later. Even Orion Gate shook violently. Then, silence. The tactical displays slowly rebooted. One by one, surviving sensor feeds returned. And the chamber froze. The Dominion fleet was gone. Thousands of ships erased. The war moon itself had been torn apart by the solar eruption, its molten remains spiraling into the star like burning fragments of a dead god. Across the battlefield, only the human fleet remained intact. Barely. Several human vessels drifted crippled through the debris field, hulls burning from radiation exposure. One ship split apart while rescue craft rushed desperately toward survivors. But they had done it. Impossible victory. Again. Inside the command chamber, nobody spoke. Not from relief, from fear, because the humans had just weaponized a star. Hours later, rescue operations filled the system. Imperial civilians celebrated across Orion Gate for the first time in years. But deep inside the fortress station, Admiral Vorn sat alone in darkness, watching classified combat footage, watching humanity. Again and again, he replayed the moment the human ships flew directly into the stellar eruption zone without hesitation. No species should willingly enter certain death like that. Yet they had, because victory required it. A quiet voice interrupted the darkness behind him. Commander Lyris. Sir. Vorn didn't turn around. Tell me honestly, he said softly. Are we being saved? He finally looked toward the burning battlefield outside the station. Or replaced. Before Lyris could answer, every screen inside the chamber suddenly flickered. An unknown transmission forced itself through all frequencies. The signal was not Dominion, not human, something else, ancient. Distorted static filled the room before a single sentence emerged. Humanity should have remained extinct. Then the transmission ended, and somewhere far beyond known space, something began waking up. The message spread across Orion Gate within minutes. Not through official broadcasts, through whispers, through frightened glances in crowded corridors, through soldiers pretending not to panic. Humanity should have remained extinct. Nobody knew who sent it, and that terrified everyone. Deep beneath Orion Gate, inside the classified intelligence vaults, Grand Admiral Serafel Vorn stood beside a sealed holographic archive while Imperial security forces locked down the entire sector. The room was silent except for the hum of ancient machines. Commander Lyris looked toward the frozen transmission waveform hovering above the table. No Dominion encryption. No known galactic language patterns. She hesitated, and it targeted the humans directly. Vorn's expression darkened, which means someone remembers them. Before either officer could speak further, the vault doors opened. Admiral Elias Ward entered alone. No escorts, no guards. Just the old human commander walking calmly into the most secure chamber in the Empire. Several Imperial officers stiffened immediately. The atmosphere changed whenever humans entered a room now. Not because they were loud, because they carried the quiet certainty of violence. Ward stopped beside the hologram. You received the signal too. It wasn't a question. Vorn studied him carefully. You know who sent it. For the first time since humanity arrived, Elias Ward looked genuinely uneasy. That alone frightened the Imperials more than any battle. The old admiral stared at the transmission waveform for several seconds before finally speaking. There are things beyond the edge of mapped space, he said quietly. Things older than the Empire. Commander Lyris crossed her arms. You're avoiding the question. Ward nodded slightly. Yes. Silence. Then he looked directly at them. Because if I answer honestly, you'll want humanity to leave. Outside Orion Gate, the battlefield still burned. Massive wrecks drifted through the void, while salvage crews searched for survivors among shattered fleets. But hidden inside the debris field, something moved. A damaged Dominion drone slowly reactivated beneath the corpse of a destroyed carrier. Its cracked organic sensors flickered weakly through the darkness. Then it detected motion. Human salvage teams. The drone transmitted emergency hive data automatically. A final report for the Dominion overmind. The message was simple. Humans have returned. Seconds later, a rail round punched through the drone and vaporized it instantly. Nearby, a human sniper lowered his weapon silently. Watching. Always watching. Meanwhile, inside the human flagship Resolute, tension spread across the bridge like poison. Human officers moved faster now. Sharply. Fearfully. Something had changed after the transmission. Commander David Reyes approached Ward carefully. Sir, long-range scouts confirmed it. Ward closed his eyes briefly. How many? Unknown. But the dark space anomalies are multiplying. A heavy silence followed. Reyes lowered his voice. The Imperials deserve to know. Ward looked toward the viewport where Orion's burning star illuminated drifting wreckage. No, he said quietly. If they know what's coming, they'll collapse. Hours later, Orion Gate celebrated victory. Crowded halls filled with exhausted civilians cheering human crews as rescue ships returned to the station. For the first time in 12 years, music echoed through parts of the fortress. Children painted human fleet symbols on station walls. Imperial soldiers toasted beside human marines. Hope had returned, but not everyone was celebrating. Inside a dark observation chamber high above the station, Emperor Caliph himself watched humanity through holographic surveillance feeds. The ruler of the Galactic Empire looked ancient beneath the pale light of the displays. Beside him stood Minister Thalek, head of Imperial Intelligence. They adore them now, Thalek said cautiously. Caliph watched footage of human soldiers carrying wounded civilians from burning wrecks. They should, the Emperor admitted. Another screen showed humans fighting inside infested ships. Another displayed the solar eruption battle. Then another, human vessels ramming enemy carriers. Human marines fighting after losing limbs. Human pilots smiling before suicide runs. Caliph's voice grew quieter. No species behaves this way. Thalek hesitated. Your Majesty, there's more. He activated a classified file recovered from ancient Imperial archives. The hologram displayed a faded image of old star charts far beyond known galactic borders. Then a single symbol appeared. A black circular mark. The same symbol hidden within the mysterious transmission. Caliph frowned. What is this? Thalek swallowed nervously. An extinct civilization. Supposedly. The Emperor slowly turned toward him. Supposedly? The intelligence minister nodded. According to forbidden records, they encountered humanity over 600 years ago. Silence filled the chamber. Caliph's eyes narrowed. And, Thalek's voice nearly broke. They feared humans. Suddenly, alarms erupted throughout Orion Gate. Celebrations instantly died. Emergency lights flooded the station crimson. Commander Lyris' voice echoed through military channels. All personnel to battle stations immediately. Admiral Vorn rushed back into the command chamber as officers shouted over each other. Multiple spatial ruptures detected. Unknown signatures emerging. Not Dominion. The holographic battlefield expanded outward. And everyone froze. The stars themselves were disappearing. Not from ships. From darkness. Entire regions of space beyond Orion Gate had begun turning black, as though something enormous was blocking out the galaxy itself. Sensor readings collapsed. Communications failed. Then shapes appeared. Gigantic. Ancient. Moving slowly through the void like mountains drifting beneath an ocean. One officer whispered in terror. How big are those things? Nobody answered, because the scanners couldn't measure them. Then a transmission arrived. Not spoken. Felt. A deep vibration spread through every system aboard Orion Gate. Every screen flickered simultaneously, and one sentence appeared across the station in ancient translated text. Species designation. Humanity. Status. Surviving error. Correction will now resume. Silence consumed the station. Even Admiral Vorn couldn't speak. But across the chamber, Elias Ward slowly stood from his seat. And for the first time since arriving at Orion Gate, the human admiral looked afraid. The galaxy did not move. It waited. Orion Gate's entire command structure stood frozen as the impossible words lingered on every display. Correction will now resume. Then silence. Not relief. Not calm. A suffocating absence of communication so complete it felt like the universe had stopped breathing. Commander Lyris was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. Admiral, what does correction mean? No one answered, because every human on the bridge had gone still. Even Admiral Elias Ward. Far beyond Orion Gate, the darkness expanded. The massive unknown structures drifted closer into system space. At first, Imperial sensors struggled to resolve them. Then the truth emerged slowly, unwillingly. They were not ships, not even fleets. They were constructs, ancient ones. Each larger than moons, their surfaces layered in shifting geometry that made no sense to Imperial science. Reality distortion fields bent around them like gravity was merely an opinion. Vorn's hands tightened. They're outside known physics. Ward stared at the display, jaw clenched. They were never supposed to be here. That single sentence chilled the room more than any explosion ever could. Suddenly, every human system across Orion Gate activated simultaneously. Not combat systems, not weapons, emergency archival protocols. Inside the resolute, sealed compartments unlocked for the first time in centuries. Deep vaults opened, and humanity revealed something it had hidden from the galaxy since its arrival. Planetary map, Earth. The human homeworld appeared on every Imperial display across the station without permission. No one had transmitted it. It simply forced itself into existence. Commander Lyris stepped back in shock. That's not possible. Ward spoke quietly. It's broadcasting itself. The hologram expanded. Earth rotated slowly in space. Blue oceans, white clouds, green continents. Beautiful, calm, deceptively peaceful. Then the image shifted. Burned cities, collapsed megastructures, oceans boiling, atmosphere tearing apart under orbital strikes. Mass extinction events played in rapid succession. And then, something worse. A galactic map. Human colonies marked across the stars. Each one fading. Each one destroyed. Systematic eradication. Commander Lyris looked sick. Who did this? Ward didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at Earth's burning timeline. The Karthic Dominion wasn't our first war. The room fell silent. He continued. They were just the ones who survived long enough to be remembered. The display shifted again. Older. Far older. Pre-FTL human civilizations. The first expansion era. A young humanity reaching for the stars. Then, the enemy appeared. Not Dominion. Not Imperial. Something worse. A symbol. The same black spiral. But larger. Older. And infinite in scale. Imperial officers stared in confusion as classified human archives began auto-translating. A phrase emerged. The first correction event. Vorn's voice was low. What is that? Ward's eyes darkened. Something that tried to erase us before we learned how to remember. Outside Orion Gate, the unknown megastructures finally entered visual range. And space itself seemed to bend around them. They did not fire weapons. They did not need to. Entire sectors of stars flickered and dimmed as they approached. Reality instability spread like a disease. One by one, human ships began broadcasting emergency codes. Not battle formations. Evacuation protocols. Commander Reyes rushed onto the bridge. Sir, all human vessels are powering down combat systems. Lyris turned sharply. Why would they do that? Ward answered without looking away from Earth's projection. Because this isn't a battle. Pause. Then, it's a judgment. Suddenly, a new transmission burst across all channels. Not Dominion, not alien, human, but distorted, urgent. A voice cut through the static. All human commands. This is Sole Emergency Archive. They found Earth. The transmission broke into interference. Then returned briefly. The Covenant is active. Silence. Then static again. Commander Lyris turned pale. What Covenant? Ward finally closed his eyes. The one we hoped never to wake. In deep space near the unknown structures, something massive shifted. Not ships, not machines, but intent. And for the first time since humanity entered the war, every Dominion hive node across the galaxy went silent. Not destroyed, not attacked, just stopped, as if something had reached into their minds and turned them off. Across Orion Gate, alarms flared again. But this time the warning was different. No enemy designation, no weapon tracking, only one line. Ancient authority detected. Commander Lyris whispered, "We're not the target, are we?" Ward opened his eyes slowly. "No," he said. "We never were." The hologram of Earth flickered one final time, and behind it, something vast began to emerge from the darkness between stars. Not invading, not arriving, but returning. The galaxy stopped pretending it understood anything. Across every known sector, fleets froze mid-transit. Weapons powered down without command. Entire civilizations watched their skies darken as if reality itself had been muted. And at Orion Gate, even the stars felt distant. The unknown megastructures were no longer approaching. They were surrounding, not in physical space alone, but in every detectable layer of reality. Sensors failed. Backup systems failed. Even manual observation became unreliable, as if the universe refused to be measured. Commander Lyris stood rigid at her station. "Admiral, we're losing dimensional stability readings." A junior officer shouted from across the chamber. "Gravity fluctuations are exceeding safe thresholds." Another voice broke in, panicked. "The Dominion Hive network just collapsed." That last sentence silenced the room. Every Imperial officer turned. On the main display, Dominion fleets, once endless and coordinated, were dissolving into chaos. Not destroyed, not attacked, just disconnected. Ships drifted without coordination. Hive commands no longer responded. Entire battle groups began colliding with each other like blind insects. Commander Reyes whispered, "They lost their overmind control." But Admiral Ward's expression tightened. That wasn't the Dominion's doing. He stared at the dark edge of the system where the unknown structures loomed. They were cut off. Deep inside the Karthic Dominion core realm, panic erupted across the Hive consciousness. The overmind pulsed violently within its biomechanical throne, billions of neural links flickering and dying around it like burning stars. It had never experienced isolation, never silence. Then, a presence entered the network. Not through signal, not through transmission, through overriding reality itself. The overmind recoiled as ancient code flooded its consciousness. Impossible structures formed inside its mind, symbols older than its species, older than its civilization. A command embedded into the fabric of thought itself. And then it understood. Too late. Subject classification. Correction zone violation detected. The overmind screamed, not physically, but across every connected node in existence. And for the first time in its history, no one answered. At Orion Gate, the human fleet suddenly activated. But not in aggression, in formation. Perfect synchronization across hundreds of vessels as they formed a vast geometric pattern around the station. Commander Lyris stepped back. "Their positioning?" Reyes frowned. "For what?" Admiral Ward finally spoke. "For containment." Silence. Then alarms erupted again. But this time, the danger did not come from the Dominion. It came from the unknown structures themselves. Massive energy shifts formed at the edge of the system. Something was preparing to act. Not fire, not attack, erase. Inside the human flagship Resolute, emergency red light flooded the command deck. Ward stood alone before a sealed console that had not been opened in centuries. A biometric lock activated automatically as he approached. Commander Reyes watched carefully. "Sir, what is that system?" Ward hesitated. Then, the last failsafe. The console opened. Inside was not a weapon interface, not a command system, but a single recorded message. Ward pressed it. A voice filled the bridge. Not his, older, heavier, human. "If you are hearing this, then containment has failed." The image flickered. Earth appeared again. But this time it was different. Protected. Surrounded by impossible defensive constructs spanning the solar system. And beyond them, something vast. Watching. The message continued. "The First Covenant exists for one purpose. Prevent recursion events." Lyris stepped forward. "Recursion? What does that mean?" Ward didn't answer. The message continued anyway. "If Earth is ever identified again by the Outer Custodians, initiate Protocol 7. A long pause. Then the final line. Do not attempt diplomacy. The recording ended. Silence swallowed the bridge. Reyes looked pale. Sir, what is Protocol 7? Ward's voice was barely audible. Ending the cycle. Outside Orion Gate, the unknown megastructures finally moved. But not toward the station. Not toward fleets. Toward the Dominion Hive core regions scattered across the galaxy. And wherever they passed, reality changed. Entire Dominion fleets vanished without explosion. Entire Hive worlds went dark. No debris. No warning. Only absence. Commander Lyris watched in horror. They're deleting them. Reyes shook his head. No. They're correcting them. Then it happened. The Overmind tried one final counterattack. Every remaining Dominion vessel converged into a single hyperswarm formation, channeling everything it had left into a last strike toward Orion Gate. A billion ships. A final desperate wave of extinction. But before they could arrive, the sky broke, not into light, not into fire, but into absence. The unknown structures emitted a pulse so silent it could not be recorded. And the Dominion fleet simply stopped existing. Not destroyed, not scattered, removed. Across Orion Gate, every sensor simultaneously failed and rebooted in panic. When they returned, there was nothing left. No Dominion ships, no Hive signals, no Overmind, just empty space. Commander Lyris whispered, "It's gone." Reyes stared at the void. All of it. Ward didn't answer immediately. Then quietly, "No." He looked at Earth's faint projection still flickering in the command chamber. Something is still left. The unknown structures began to recede. Not leaving, but withdrawing, like a verdict completed. And as they faded into darkness, one final message appeared across every system in Orion Gate. Not in language, not in code, but in understanding. Cycle stabilized. Humanity. Contained status restored. Silence returned. But it was not peace. It was warning. Because Admiral Ward was staring at the message like a man who had just realized the truth. And finally he spoke. They didn't save us. Pause. They were checking if we were still dangerous. Across the shattered galaxy, something older than empires had just finished deciding humanity's place again. For the first time since the war began, the galaxy was quiet. Not peaceful. Not healed. Quiet in the way a battlefield becomes silent after something too large to comprehend has passed over it. Across thousands of star systems, broken fleets drifted in dead space. Dominion Hive worlds were empty shells. Entire sectors of the galaxy blinked with missing star maps, as if pieces of reality had been carefully erased and never replaced. And at Orion Gate, survivors did not celebrate. They waited, because everyone understood something had changed. Something final. Inside the command chamber, Admiral Seraphel Vorn stood before the main viewport. The battlefield outside was unrecognizable. No enemy fleets. No alien signals. Only fractured debris slowly orbiting a dying star. Commander Lyris spoke quietly behind him. "It's over, isn't it?" Vorn did not answer immediately. He looked toward the human fleet still stationed beyond Orion Gate. Damaged ships. Silent formations. No victory cheers. No celebration broadcasts. Just stillness. Finally, he said, "No." Pause. "Something ended. But I don't think we were part of the ending." On the human flagship Resolute, the mood was heavier than any battlefield silence. Admiral Elias Ward stood alone in the dim command deck. Every tactical screen had been wiped clean. No enemy signatures. No unknown structures. No Dominion Hive presence. Just empty space. Commander Reyes approached carefully. "Sir, the Imperials are asking for a statement." Ward didn't move. And Reyes hesitated. "They want to know what happens now." That question lingered in the air longer than any explosion ever had. Ward finally turned toward the viewport. Beyond the glass, Orion Gate still burned faintly against the darkness. "Now," he said quietly, "we decide what kind of galaxy survives this." Hours later, a massive emergency summit was called. Not just Imperial Command, but surviving alien civilizations across multiple sectors. For the first time in galactic history, hundreds of species gathered under one coordinated defense channel. And at its center, humanity. The hall was vast, holographic, spanning multiple star systems. Representatives appeared as projected forms, uneasy and uncertain. Emperor Calith spoke first. "Explain what we witnessed." Silence. All eyes turned to Admiral Ward. He stepped forward slowly. The room expected a warlord, a conqueror, a being shaped by endless violence. Instead, they saw a tired man. Ward spoke calmly. What you saw was not an invasion. Pause. It was containment. Murmurs spread instantly. A Dominion survivor delegate hissed. Containment of what? Ward looked directly at them. Of us. Silence fell. Even the Imperial representatives froze. Ward continued. The galaxy has been reset before. More than once. Civilizations reach a point where they become unstable. He gestured toward the void. The custodians ensure they don't destroy everything else. Emperor Caliph leaned forward. And humanity? Ward hesitated. Then, we are the anomaly they never managed to fully erase. The chamber erupted into chaos. Accusations, fear, demanded explanations. But Ward raised a hand, and the entire hall slowly quieted, because his next words carried something heavier than authority. They judged us again today. Pause. And we survived. Outside the summit station, fleets from dozens of species floated in uneasy formation. Human ships among them, damaged, scarred, but present. Commander Lyris stood beside Admiral Vorn on an observation deck. They could have taken control of everything, she said quietly. Vorn nodded. Yes. A long silence. Why didn't they? From behind them, a human officer answered. Because survival is not the same as domination. They turned. It was Commander Reyes. He looked out at the gathering fleets. We've been strong before, he said. Strong enough to win wars. Strong enough to erase enemies. He shook his head. But every time humanity chose that path, we almost stopped being human. At the summit, Ward activated the final transmission. A symbol appeared across every system. A new treaty framework. Not empire. Not domination. Not submission. A coalition. The Galactic Defense Accord. Emperor Caliph frowned. You expect us to trust humanity after all this? Ward met his gaze. No. Pause. I expect you to trust survival. Silence. Then slowly, one by one, alien representatives began to agree. Not because they were convinced, but because they had seen what existed beyond refusal. And they had no better alternative. Far beyond the galaxy's edge, where even custodians did not fully observe, something vast began to withdraw completely. The unknown structures faded from perception like a dream being forgotten. But before they vanished entirely, one final message echoed across the void. Not aimed at worlds, not aimed at fleets, but at humanity itself. Status. Monitored species stabilized. Next cycle. Delayed. Then silence. Back at Orion Gate, the celebrations finally began. Not loud, not triumphant, but real. Humans and aliens stood together in the same corridors that once echoed with panic. Shared food, shared stories, shared silence. Children from imperial families played beside human engineers. Former enemies rebuilt broken stations side by side. But Admiral Ward remained at the observation deck, watching it all quietly. Commander Lyris approached him. You saved us. Ward shook his head slightly. No. He looked out into the stars. We just bought time. Lyris frowned. For what? Ward's answer came after a long pause. For the galaxy to decide if it deserves to exist without fear. And as the fleets of a newly formed coalition spread across the stars, one truth remained unspoken. The galaxy had not been freed. It had been tested. And humanity had passed.